The phone rang in the forbidden dawn. She offered what she held most sacred. A millionaire heard her shocking proposal, but the price would be much more than the bed. What's your guess for the ending of this story? Write in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and tell us which city you're watching from. I'm certain this will be the most emotional story you'll ever hear. The rising sun touched the skyscrapers of Fifth Avenue when Edward Mitchell walked through the automatic doors of MB Tech, the technology giant he had built from nothing. At 38, he commanded an empire valued in the billions, but his icy gaze and impassive expression revealed that something had broken inside him long ago. Employees greeted him with a mixture of admiration and fear as he walked down the mirrored corridor to the penthouse, where a board meeting awaited him. "Good morning, Edward," said Christine, his assistant for more than a decade, the only person who still dared to call him by his first name. "The quarterly reports are on your desk, and Ryan asked to confirm dinner today." Edward nodded without emotion. Ryan Adams had been his best friend in college and was now his right-hand man in the company, the only one he still trusted, or at least that's what he thought. Confirm it, and schedule a video conference with the Singapore investors for Thursday. The penthouse office was an extension of his personality. Minimalist, functional, imposing. The panoramic view of New York City served as a constant reminder of the power he had acquired. Through the bulletproof glass, Edward observed the metropolis. Like a private kingdom, he had everything, he commanded everything, except for the peace that had eluded him for 3 years. The images of that night still tormented him. The sound of Brooke's laughter, his fiancée coming from the bedroom, the half-open door. The scene that destroyed his ability to trust. Brooke in the arms of Victor, his partner, his childhood friend. The double betrayal that not only broke his heart, but transformed him into something different. "Are you all right, sir?" Christine interrupted his thoughts, placing a cup of coffee on the desk. "I always am," he replied coldly. "Please ask Ryan to move up the merger contracts. I want to review them before the meeting." While typing on his computer, his hand stopped. Over the keyboard upon receiving a notification. Victor Barnes had just been named CEO of a competing startup. Edward tasted the bitter bile. After the scandal, he had bought out Victor's share of the company, but he never managed to completely erase his presence from the market. The man who betrayed him was now becoming a direct competitor. 15 miles away in Brooklyn, reality was completely different. In a modest apartment, Lauren Davis stared at the email from the medical school with tears in her eyes. Her scholarship had been renewed, but that wouldn't be enough. At 24, she was in the penultimate year of her course, dividing herself between unpaid internships and caring for her younger sister. "You're going to be late for class," said Melissa, her roommate, putting bread in the toaster. "And today's the day to take Claire to her appointment. Don't forget." Claire, only 15, was the center of Lauren's life. The younger sister had been suffering from a rare disease affecting her immune system since she was 12. Orphaned early on, the Davis sisters had only each other. Their parents had perished in an accident when Lauren was 18, leaving her responsible for her younger sister. "I won't forget," Lauren replied, closing her laptop, "but I need to stop by the hospital first. Dr. Samuel called last night." Melissa's expression changed. "Did he find something?" Lauren hesitated. "Yes, an experimental treatment at a private institute, but it costs more money than I could gather in 5 years." The treatment was the only hope for Claire, whose condition had been deteriorating in recent months. Lauren had exhausted all possibilities, loans, extra jobs, even selling the only valuable asset they owned, the car left by their parents. Nothing was enough for the $700,000 needed to start the therapeutic protocol. That afternoon, while waiting in the corridor of St. Luke's Hospital, Lauren met Fiona, a former college classmate who now worked as a personal secretary for a businessman. "You look exhausted," Fiona commented, sitting beside her in the waiting room. "I'm desperate, Fee. I need money for Claire's treatment, and I don't know what else to do." Fiona looked around, lowered her voice, and took a business card from her purse. "I shouldn't tell you this, but I know some girls who got quick money from powerful men. It's nothing illegal, you understand? They're discreet arrangements. Lauren felt her stomach turn. "Are you suggesting that I'm suggesting that you consider all options," Fiona interrupted. "This man," she pointed to the card, "is the owner of the company where I work, Edward Mitchell. He's reserved, rich, and from what I know, hasn't been emotionally involved with anyone since he ended his engagement. Some girls from the agency have, and he's generous." Lauren returned the card as if it burned her fingers. "I can't." "Think about your sister," Fiona insisted. "You said yourself that time is running out." That night, after putting Claire to bed, Lauren cried silently on the living room sofa. The business card which had ended up in her purse seemed to weigh a ton. The idea was revolting, but the image of Claire withering away each day was even more unbearable. After hours of agony, she picked up the phone. In the Fifth Avenue penthouse, Edward was analyzing documents when his cell phone rang. Unknown number. Normally he would ignore it, but something made him answer. Edward Mitchell. On the other end, a hesitant female voice. "Mr. Mitchell, my name is Lauren Davis. Fiona from your company gave me your contact. I would like to talk about a private matter." He almost hung up. He had been through this before, women interested in his money, but something in her voice, a mixture of desperation and determination, stopped him. Tomorrow. Le Bernardin. 8:00. And he hung up without waiting for a response. What Edward couldn't imagine was that this call would forever change the course of his life, and that the woman on the other end of the line carried a burden as heavy as his, though of a completely different nature. Le Bernardin was one of the most exclusive restaurants in New York, frequented by the financial elite and celebrities. Lauren had never set foot in such a place. Dressed in the only black dress she owned, bought on sale 2 years ago, she felt out of place among the elegant women and men in Italian suits. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt as the maitre d' led her to a reserved table in the most discreet corner of the salon. Edward was already there, imposing in his dark, custom-made suit. His dark brown eyes examined Lauren with a mixture of indifference and clinical curiosity. He didn't stand when she approached, merely indicating the chair across from him with a subtle gesture. "Mr. Mitchell, thank you for seeing me," Lauren began, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "Let's get straight to the point, Miss Davis. What kind of proposal do you have for me?" The coldness in his voice was calculated, the result of years keeping people out of his inner circle. Lauren swallowed hard. The words she had rehearsed all afternoon seemed to have evaporated. How could she explain to a stranger that she was there to offer the one thing she never thought she would negotiate? She hesitated, looking at her own hands. "My sister. Claire's sick, very sick. She has Goldman-Merrick syndrome." Edward frowned. He knew the disease, a rare autoimmune condition that progressively attacked the central nervous system. His own mother had funded research on rare diseases through her foundation. "And what does that have to do with me?" "There's an experimental treatment," continued Lauren, now looking directly into his eyes. "At the Gamma Institute, here in New York. It's the only hope for her, but it costs $700,000 to start the protocol." "I see," replied Edward, taking a sip of wine. "And you're looking for a sponsor. Why me?" Lauren felt her face burn. This was it. There was no way to soften what she was about to say. "Because I'm willing to offer something in return." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "Fiona told me that you prefer relationships without emotional complications, discreet ones." A heavy silence fell over the table. Edward observed the young woman before him, noticing for the first time the details. The intense green eyes, the natural brown hair tied in a simple bun, the erect posture despite her evident nervousness. She wasn't the type of woman who normally approached him. "Do you know who I am?" he finally asked. "I know you're one of the richest men in the country, owner of MB Tech, and that you haven't been seriously involved with anyone for years." Edward gave a humorless smile. "And you think you're worth $700,000? The deliberately cruel question made Lauren pale, but she didn't back down. "I think my sister's life is worth any sacrifice," she responded with dignity. "And I didn't come to propose one night. I came to propose an arrangement." This captured his attention. Edward rested his elbows on the table, leaning slightly forward. What kind of arrangement? 6 months, said Lauren, surprising herself with the proposal she had just formulated. Exclusive availability for 6 months, absolute discretion, no emotional involvement, just companionship when you desire it. Edward studied the proposal with the same coldness with which he analyzed million-dollar contracts. The girl was beautiful, certainly, but there was something more, an integrity, an inner strength he rarely encountered, and 6 months meant control, something he valued above all else. Why would I accept something like this when I can have whoever I want with no commitment at all? Because you value discretion and control, replied Lauren, surprising him with her insight. And because I'm offering exclusivity and a guarantee that this ends when you want it to. No drama, no expectations, no complications. Something in her eyes, a mixture of desperation and determination, made Edward feel an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time: respect. $1,000 a day, he said suddenly, for 6 months, totaling $180,000. The rest will be paid after the first month if I'm satisfied with our arrangement. Lauren quickly did the math. It would be enough to start Claire's treatment. I accept, she replied, extending her hand. Edward looked at her hand but didn't touch it. Instead, he called the waiter and asked for the check. My driver will take you home today. Tomorrow, my lawyer will contact you with the terms in writing. When you sign, you'll receive the first payment. Meanwhile, miles away, in Ryan Adams' luxurious apartment, a secret meeting was taking place. Victor Barnes, Edward's former partner, was slowly sipping a whiskey while Ryan typed something on his computer. So it's confirmed then? Asked Victor, with a malicious smile on his lips. He doesn't suspect anything? Absolutely nothing, replied Ryan, turning the laptop screen so Victor could see. The merger with Neotech is practically closed. When we announce that you're the real owner, Edward will lose half of MB Tech's market value. Victor laughed, satisfied. Revenge was near. 3 years meticulously planning the ruin of the man who had expelled him from the company he had helped found. And Brooke, asked Ryan, referring to Edward's ex-fiancée, is she still willing to collaborate? Of course she is. Her ambition was always greater than any feeling, replied Victor with disdain. She'll do anything for the money I promised. What neither of the two traitors knew was that their conspiracy would soon meet an unexpected obstacle in the form of a young medical student who had just entered Edward Mitchell's life. The next day, Lauren received a visit from Dr. Anthony Martinez, Edward's personal lawyer. The contract was surprisingly simple, providing escort services for 6 months, with strict confidentiality and exclusivity clauses. With it came a check to the Gamma Institute for the exact amount of Claire's treatment. Mr. Mitchell prefers that the payment be made directly to the Institute, explained the lawyer. This way there won't be questions about the source of the money. Lauren signed the papers with trembling hands. It was done. She had sold 6 months of her life, but secured a chance of survival for her sister. That same day, she took Claire to the Gamma Institute. While the teenager underwent the first examinations, Lauren felt her cell phone vibrate. A message from Edward. Dinner, tonight, 8 p.m. My driver will pick you up at 7:30. Short, direct, without any cordiality, exactly like the man who was now her. What? Patron? Client? The reality of what she had done began to weigh on her shoulders. That night, precisely at 7:30, a black Mercedes stopped in front of Lauren's building. The driver, a middle-aged man with a discreet appearance, opened the rear door without asking questions. To her surprise, the car didn't head to a restaurant, but followed FDR Drive to an exclusive residential area in the Upper East Side. Edward Mitchell's mansion stood imposingly behind high walls. Minimalist and modern, it seemed like a fortress of glass and concrete, isolated from the rest of the world. When the electronic gate opened, Lauren felt a chill in her stomach. It was real. She was about to start a contract with a man she barely knew on his own terms. Edward was waiting for her in the spacious living room with a view of the illuminated city. He wore casual clothes, dark pants and a button-up shirt with rolled-up sleeves, that somehow made him even more intimidating. "Punctual. I like that," he said as a greeting, offering her a glass of wine. "Claire's treatment started today," replied Lauren, accepting the drink but not touching it. I wanted to thank you." "Don't thank me, it's a business arrangement," Edward cut in coldly. "Come, dinner is served on the terrace." As she followed him through the impeccable house, decorated with pieces of contemporary art and virtually no photos or personal objects, Lauren wondered what had transformed this man into someone so emotionally isolated. And more importantly, what exactly he expected from her on this first night of the strangest contract she could imagine. The terrace of the mansion offered a panoramic view of New York City. Lights twinkled throughout the city, creating a carpet of artificial stars that stretched to the horizon. The table was impeccably set for 2 people, with a discreet elegance that impressed Lauren. A private waiter served the dishes, while Edward maintained a calculated silence. "You don't need to be so tense," he finally said, after dismissing the waiter. "I'm not going to devour you." Lauren tried to smile unsuccessfully. "Sorry, it's just that all of this is new to me." "I imagine so," replied Edward, observing her with intensity. "Let's establish some rules to make things easier. First, when you're with me, you are my companion. Not an employee, you understand?" "I understand," Lauren nodded. "Second, absolute discretion. Nothing that happens between these walls should be discussed with anyone. Nothing about me, my business, or my personal life." She agreed again. "Third, exclusivity. During these 6 months, you don't get involved with anyone else, and I expect absolute honesty." "That's fair," replied Lauren, finding the courage to ask, "And you? Will you also be exclusive?" Edward smiled with the corner of his mouth, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "That wasn't in the contract, but yes, while our agreement lasts, I'll be exclusive." A silence fell between them, filled only by the distant song of birds and the muffled noise of the city below. "You have questions," stated Edward, not as a question, but as an observation. "I do," she admitted, mustering courage. "Why would someone like you need an arrangement like this? You could have any woman." Edward set his fork aside, leaning back in his chair. "Exactly because of that. I don't want any woman. I want someone who understands that this is business. No romantic fantasies, no emotional expectations, no complications." "Someone hurt you deeply," Lauren ventured, immediately realizing her mistake when she saw his face harden. "I'm not paying for psychological analyses," he cut in dryly. "Your turn. Why does a brilliant medical student resort to this instead of seeking other alternatives?" The question surprised her. "How do you know I'm a medical student?" "I did my research before accepting the agreement. Lauren Davis, 24, orphan, responsible for her younger sister since 18. Full scholarship at Columbia University School of Medicine, with exceptional grades. Volunteer intern at St. Luke's Hospital. Never involved in scandals or problems. A clean record, and a life dedicated to studies and your sister. What intrigues me is why someone with your potential chose this path." Lauren felt exposed, vulnerable. "I've tried all the respectable paths, loans, support foundations, government programs. Nothing worked. Time is running out for Claire." Edward nodded, satisfied with her honesty. "One last rule, never lie to me. I hate lies more than anything else." The following weeks established a strange routine. Edward requested Lauren's presence 2 or 3 times a week, usually for dinners at his mansion or at exclusive restaurants. To her surprise, he didn't show immediate physical interest, contenting himself with her company and conversations that gradually became less tense. Lauren discovered that Edward was a cultured man with vast knowledge about literature, art, and science. Their discussions about medicine in particular were stimulating. He followed the latest research and had well-founded opinions about advances in the field. On a particularly pleasant night, after a concert at Lincoln Center, Edward surprised her with a personal question. "How is your sister?" Lauren smiled, genuinely touched by his interest. "The treatment is showing results. Her blood markers have improved and she has more energy. The doctors are optimistic." "Good," he replied simply. but something in his eyes had softened. On another occasion, during dinner at the top of the Empire State Building, Edward received a call that left him visibly disturbed. After hanging up, he remained silent for long minutes. "Any problem?" Lauren ventured. "I'm facing a complicated situation at the company," he replied, surprising her with the confidence. "There are indications that strategic information is leaking to the competition." "Do you suspect anyone?" Edward hesitated, as if pondering how much he could reveal. "I prefer not to suspect anyone, but I know someone close is betraying me. Again." The last word escaped like a bitter whisper. Lauren realized she had touched a deep wound. "Again?" she asked softly. Edward fixed his gaze on the illuminated city. 3 years ago, I discovered that my fiancé and my best friend, who was also my partner, were betraying me. Not just emotionally, but in business too. They were planning to push me out of the company I built. It was the first time he had spoken about his past. Lauren remained silent, allowing him to continue if he wanted. "The worst part wasn't losing Brooke," he continued, surprising himself with the revelation. "It was discovering that Victor, someone I considered a brother, was willing to destroy me out of ambition." "I'm sorry," said Lauren, resisting the urge to touch his hand. "Don't be. It was a valuable lesson. Trust is a luxury I can't afford." That night marked a subtle change in their relationship. Edward began to share more about his professional life, sometimes even asking Lauren's opinion on complex situations. She, in turn, talked about Claire, her studies, and her dreams of specializing in rare diseases. On a rainy night, 2 months after the start of the agreement, Edward invited her to stay at the mansion. The storm had knocked down trees throughout the city, making the journey to Lauren's apartment dangerous. "We have enough rooms," he said naturally. "Richard can take you home in the morning." It was the first time Lauren slept in the mansion. The guest room was larger than her entire apartment, with an impressive view of the city even under the torrential rain. In the morning, she found Edward in the kitchen preparing coffee. "You make your own coffee?" she asked, surprised to see the powerful businessman performing such a mundane task. "Some things I prefer to do myself," he replied, handing her a cup. "How is Claire?" "Better every day. The doctors are impressed with her response to the treatment." Edward nodded, satisfied. "I have a proposal. The Mitchell Foundation is organizing a charity ball for research on rare diseases. I'd like you to accompany me." Lauren almost choked on her coffee. "A public event? I thought our agreement was discreet." "And it will remain so. You'll be introduced as my companion, nothing more. Many executives bring companions to these events." The Mitchell Foundation Ball was one of the most prestigious events on the New York social calendar. Held at the Waldorf Astoria, it gathered the country's business and political elite. For the occasion, Edward sent a stylist to Lauren, who could choose among various haute couture dresses. She opted for an emerald green model, elegant without being ostentatious. When Edward saw her ready, his eyes lingered on her in a way that made her heart race. "You look perfect," he said, offering her his arm. The ball was a whirlwind of introductions, sophisticated conversations, and classical music. Lauren, initially intimidated, soon discovered that her medical background gave her something to talk about with many of those present. Edward observed from a distance, surprisingly proud of how naturally she carried herself among such influential people. It was during a break in the presentations that Lauren noticed a man observing Edward with intensity. Tall, with graying hair at the temples and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Who is that man looking at you?" she asked discreetly. Edward followed her gaze and his entire body stiffened. "Victor Barnes, my former partner." "The man who—" "Yes," Edward cut in with a tense voice. "I don't know what he's doing here, but I'm sure it's not a coincidence." Before they could move away, Victor approached, accompanied by a stunning blonde woman. "Edward, it's been a while," said Victor with false cordiality. "I didn't expect to find you so well accompanied." "Victor," replied Edward coldly, "I thought charity events weren't your style." "People change," smiled Victor, turning to Lauren. "And who is this charming young woman?" "Lauren Davis," she introduced herself, instantly feeling the tension between the two men. "Enchanted, Miss Davis," replied Victor, kissing her hand with exaggerated gallantry. "Allow me to introduce Brooke Resende." Lauren felt the impact of the name. Brooke, the ex-fiancée. The blonde woman smiled maliciously, studying her from head to toe. "Edward always had good taste," commented Brooke with a honeyed voice, "and it seems he also has a type. Impressionable and available young women." Edward took a step forward, but Lauren gently touched his arm. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," she said, with a calmness that surprised everyone, including herself. "If you'll excuse us, I promised Dr. Edward a dance." Leading him to the dance floor, she felt the tension in his body. "Breathe," she whispered. "They want to provoke you." "How did you know?" asked Edward, as the music enveloped them. "I'm good at reading people," replied Lauren, "and those two are transparent in their resentment." As they danced, Lauren noticed Victor whispering something in Ryan Adams' ear, Edward's supposedly loyal friend. The conspiratorial expression on the faces of the two men lit a warning in her mind. Something was wrong, very wrong. 3 months had passed since the beginning of the agreement between Edward and Lauren. What had begun as a cold, calculated transaction was gradually transforming into something neither of them had foreseen. Edward discovered in Lauren a companion who not only satisfied his needs for social accompaniment, but also offered something he had forgotten, a genuine connection without hidden agendas. On a Sunday afternoon, something unprecedented happened. Edward invited Lauren for a helicopter ride along the coast. They flew over the beaches of the Hamptons to Martha's Vineyard, where they landed for lunch by the sea. "I've never seen you so relaxed," commented Lauren, observing him barefoot on the sand with his shirt sleeves rolled up and the first buttons open. Edward smiled, a gesture that now happened more frequently. "It's been a long time since I've been here. This place was special to my mother." It was rare for Edward to mention his family. Lauren knew through discreet research that his parents had passed away many years ago, leaving him alone in command of the empire they had built. She liked the sea? She loved it. She said the ocean was the only thing in the world big enough to make humans understand their true dimension. He paused, looking at the horizon. She created the foundation before she left. It was her legacy. "She seems to have been an incredible woman," commented Lauren softly. "She was," agreed Edward, turning to her with a different expression. "She would have liked you." Those words, simple and direct, made something vibrate inside Lauren. It was the first time Edward had suggested that she could have a place in his life beyond the contract. The moment was interrupted by the ring of Edward's cell phone. He frowned as he checked the screen. "I need to take this. It's Ryan." Stepping away a few paces, Edward spoke quickly with his right-hand man. When he returned, his expression had hardened again. "We need to go back to New York. There's been a problem with the Neotech merger." During the return flight, Edward remained taciturn, absorbed in thoughts that clearly disturbed him. Only when they landed on the MB Tech helipad did he break the silence. "I'll need to work tonight. Richard will take you home." "Could I help in any way?" offered Lauren. Edward hesitated, as if considering the proposal. "Not this time, but thank you for asking." That night, alone in her apartment, Lauren couldn't stop thinking about Edward. Something had changed between them, something that went beyond the signed contract. When her cell phone rang at 11 p.m., her heart raced, seeing his name on the screen. "Lauren?" "I'm sorry to call so late." His voice was different, almost vulnerable. "It's okay, Edward. What happened?" "We need to talk. It's important. Can I send Richard to pick you up?" 30 minutes later, Lauren was entering the Upper East Side mansion. She found Edward in the study, surrounded by scattered papers and with an expression she had never seen before. "I discovered something," he said without preamble, "and I need your opinion." "My opinion? About business?" "About people." Edward handed her a folder. "Read this." Inside were copies of emails, financial reports, and transcripts of conversations. Lauren read carefully, her stomach sinking with each page. This confirms that Ryan is passing confidential information To Victor? Edward nodded gravely. Not just that. They're planning a maneuver to remove me from control of MB Tech. The merger with Neotech is a trap. Victor is the real owner, hidden behind shell companies. But why would Ryan do this? Hasn't he been your friend for years? Money, power. Edward ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. Victor probably offered him a better position, a larger stake. History repeating itself. Lauren felt a wave of indignation. What are you going to do? Cancelling the merger would be the obvious move, but that would cause immediate damage to the company's stock. I need to be smarter. You need to find out how far this conspiracy goes, suggested Lauren. Who else is involved? Exactly, and that's where you can help me. Me? Victor and Brooke saw you at the ball. They're curious about you. We can use that. The proposal was audacious. Lauren would pretend interest in knowing more about Edward, approaching Brooke through social events where both would be present. The objective was to discover the extent of the plot against Edward and who else was involved. It's risky, warned Edward. They're dangerous in their own way. I'll do it, replied Lauren without hesitation. Claire is almost recovered, thanks to you. I owe you this. Edward held her face between his hands, a surprisingly intimate gesture. You don't owe me anything. This goes beyond our contract. If you don't want to get involved, I understand. I want to help, she insisted. Trust me. The word trust hung between them like a dangerous promise. Edward hadn't trusted anyone for years. Still, he nodded slowly. We have a new agreement then. The following week, Lauren attended a charity event at Mount Sinai Hospital where, as expected, Brooke Resende was present. Using the knowledge Edward had provided about his ex-fiancée, Lauren managed to initiate an apparently casual conversation about art, one of Brooke's few genuine interests. I never imagined finding a B. Mitchell at an event like this, commented Brooke, maliciously, after discovering that Lauren had been accompanying Edward for months. I'm not a Mitchell, corrected Lauren with a studied smile. I'm just temporary company. We all are, laughed Brooke, taking a glass of champagne. Edward will tire of you like he tired of me. He doesn't know how to love, darling. He only knows how to possess. I have no illusions, replied Lauren, feigning indifference. It's just a mutually beneficial arrangement. Something in Brooke's eyes flashed with interest. An arrangement? Fascinating. Edward was always so reserved about his relationships. People change, commented Lauren, using the same words Victor had used at the ball. That initial conversation opened the doors for others. Brooke, thirsty for information about her ex-fiancé, began to invite Lauren for lunches and shopping sessions. In each meeting, she let slip small pieces of information about Victor and his plans. He should be careful with that merger, commented Brooke one afternoon while trying on an expensive dress. Some deals are more complicated than they seem. Edward is very meticulous, replied Lauren, feigning disinterest. I doubt he would sign anything without checking every detail. Details can be manipulated, darling, especially when they come from people you trust. Each piece of information collected was carefully passed on to Edward, who gradually assembled the puzzle of the conspiracy. The net was closing around Ryan, Victor, and, surprisingly, 2 members of the MB Tech board. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening between Edward and Lauren. The nights they spent together, initially discussing the investigation, began to transform into moments of true intimacy. Not just physical, but emotional. Edward revealed parts of himself that he had kept locked away for years, his fears, his insecurities, his rare joys. On a rainy night, embraced in Edward's large bed after making love for the first time in a truly connected way, he confessed, I never thought I would be capable of feeling this again. What? Asked Lauren, tracing the contour of his face with her fingers. Trust, vulnerability. He paused, as if searching for the right word. Hope. Lauren felt tears in her eyes. What had begun as a desperate arrangement had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted. "Edward, I need to tell you something," she said, feeling the weight of the truth she carried. "What is it?" "Our contract ends in 3 weeks. Claire is practically recovered. What happens after?" Edward was silent for a moment, his calm breathing the only sound in the room. "What do you want to happen?" It was the first time he had asked her what she wanted. It had always been him determining the terms, the limits, the expectations. "I want to stay," replied Lauren simply. "Not for the contract, for us." Edward kissed her deeply, a response more eloquent than any words. The moment of happiness, however, would be brief. The next morning, while Edward was in the shower, his cell phone rang insistently. Lauren saw the name of Christine, the assistant, on the screen and answered, concerned it might be an emergency. "Edward, thank God, you need to come to the office immediately. Ryan has called an extraordinary board meeting. Something about the merger." "Christine, this is Lauren. Edward is in the shower. I'll let him know right away." There was a silence on the other end. "Lauren, you're at his house at this hour?" The tone of surprise and something else, alarm, in Christine's voice left Lauren uneasy. "Yes, I'll call him." After relaying the message, Edward dressed quickly, his expression closed. "They're accelerating the plan," he said, adjusting his tie. "I need to go." "Do you want me to go with you?" Edward hesitated. "No, this could get ugly. I prefer you to stay here, safe." Before leaving, he held her face between his hands, as he had done weeks earlier. "Lauren, regardless of what happens today, I want you to know, you changed everything." Those words sounded strangely like a farewell. Lauren felt a tightness in her chest as she watched him leave. What should have been the beginning of something new suddenly seemed threatened by shadows from the past that refused to disappear. The day that had begun with promises of a future quickly transformed into a nightmare. Lauren, unable to stay, still in the mansion while Edward faced his enemies, decided to head to MB Tech headquarters. Something in her instinct said that her presence might be necessary. Upon arriving at the imposing glass building on 5th Avenue, she found a scene of controlled chaos. Employees whispered in the corridors, and the tension was palpable. Christine, Edward's assistant, widened her eyes, seeing her exit the elevator. "Lauren, what are you doing here?" "I need to speak with Edward. Where is the board meeting?" Christine hesitated, her gaze revealing internal conflict. "On the 20th floor, main conference room, but I don't think it's a good idea to interrupt. The situation is delicate." "What's happening exactly?" The assistant looked around before lowering her voice. "Ryan presented documents alleging that Edward diverted company funds for personal interests. He's demanding a temporary removal, while an audit is conducted." "That's absurd," exclaimed Lauren. "I agree, but the documents seem convincing. Signatures, transfers, everything looks legitimate." Lauren felt her blood freeze. The trap was more elaborate than they had imagined. "I need to see these documents." "Impossible. They're in the boardroom." "Then take me there," insisted Lauren. "Please, Christine, I know you're loyal to Edward. He needs allies now." Something in Lauren's determination convinced the assistant. Together, they went up to the 20th floor. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Lauren could see Edward standing, facing a group of executives. His posture was firm, but he was clearly cornered. "I can't let you in," whispered Christine, "but I can try to get copies of the documents after the meeting." "Thank you. I'll wait in his office." While waiting, Lauren searched her mind for clues. What kind of documents could incriminate Edward so convincingly? And how could they prove they were falsified? The answer came unexpectedly when her cell phone rang. It was Brooke. "Lauren, darling, heard the news. Your benefactor is about to fall." Brooke's voice overflowed with malicious satisfaction. Lauren controlled her anger, maintaining her role. "What news?" "Oh, you don't know. Edward is being accused of diverting company funds to finance, let's say, his personal pleasures, including a very expensive treatment at the Gamma Institute for a certain Claire Davis. Your sister, I presume." The key. Floor seemed to vanish beneath Lauren's feet. They had connected the dots, linking her directly to the alleged diversion. "That's ridiculous," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Edward made a legitimate donation through the Mitchell Foundation. That's not what the documents show, darling. The transfer came directly from MB Tech's corporate accounts. And guess what? There's a very interesting contract with your name on it. A contract that specifies services rendered in exchange for regular payments. Sounds quite compromising, don't you think? Lauren felt nauseated. They had transformed her private agreement with Edward into a weapon against him. Why are you telling me this, Brooke? The woman laughed, a cold and calculating sound. Because I like you, believe it or not. And because I have a proposal. Victor is willing to withdraw the accusations if you testify against Edward. Confirm that he paid you with company money in exchange for personal favors. A small scandal, but Edward keeps his freedom. Otherwise, the district attorney's office will receive a formal complaint for corporate fraud, misappropriation of resources, and sexual exploitation. I imagine your medical career would end before it even begins. And your little sister? Well, her treatment would certainly be interrupted when the dirty money is traced. The ultimatum hung heavy in the air. Lauren closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the impossible decision. How long do I have to decide? Until the end of the day. Victor is in the room next to the board meeting, waiting for your answer. After hanging up, Lauren sat in Edward's chair, the world spinning around her. Betray the man she loved to save him, or stay loyal and watch his destruction? The office door opened, and Christine entered hurriedly, holding a folder. I got the documents, she said, handing them to Lauren. It's worse than we imagined. Lauren examined the papers, her medical training and attention to detail now serving another purpose. Bank transfers, contracts, emails, everything seemed perfectly forged to create a narrative of corruption. This doesn't make sense, she murmured, studying one of the transfers. The date. Edward was with me in Martha's Vineyard that day. He couldn't have authorized this. And this email supposedly from him has a grammar mistake that Edward would never make, added Christine, pointing to a specific line. Lauren felt a spark of hope. We need more proof, something that unmasks these forgeries once and for all. There's one person who can help us, said Christine after a moment of reflection. Richard, Edward's driver. He keeps a detailed record of all his boss's movements. If we can prove where Edward was on each of these dates, call him now. Richard arrived discreetly at the office, bringing with him a small notebook. The loyal driver explained that for security reasons, he meticulously documented all of Edward's journeys, including who accompanied him. I need confirmation for these dates, said Lauren, showing him the suspicious documents. Richard consulted his record. On April 17th, Mr. Mitchell was in Martha's Vineyard with you, miss. On the 23rd, he was at the Gamma Institute all afternoon, visiting children with rare diseases. And on April 30th, he was in Washington, D.C. for a hearing at the Department of Science and Technology. He wasn't at MB Tech headquarters on any of these dates. No, ma'am, I have the mileage log and parking receipts to confirm. It was the proof they needed. Edward couldn't have personally authorized those transfers on the indicated dates. We need to take this to the board meeting, declared Lauren, gathering the documents. They won't let you in, warned Christine. I don't need to get in. I just need Edward to see this evidence. In the 20th floor corridor, Lauren found the board secretary, a middle-aged woman with a worried expression. I need to deliver these documents to Mr. Mitchell. It's urgent. I'm sorry, but the meeting cannot be interrupted. It's about the accusations being made against him. I have evidence that can exonerate him. The woman hesitated, torn between protocol and a sense of justice. Finally, she nodded. I'll give it to him during the next break. But the break never came. Through the glass walls, Lauren saw the discussion intensify. Ryan was gesturing heatedly, while other board members seemed divided. Edward remained standing, impassive, but Lauren could see the tension in his posture. In a desperate impulse, she knocked on the glass door. All heads turned to her. Edward frowned, surprised and concerned by her presence. I'm sorry, gentlemen, said the secretary, trying to pull Lauren away. This young woman is just leaving. Let her in, ordered Edward, his voice cutting through the tense air of the room. Edward, this is highly irregular, protested Ryan. We're in the middle of a serious discussion about your conduct. A discussion Based on forged documents, retorted Lauren, advancing to the table. I have proof. A murmur ran through the room as she spread the documents on the table. These transfers supposedly authorized by Edward. Impossible. He was in Martha's Vineyard on this date, in Washington, D.C. on another, and at the Gamma Institute on the poor. Third, I have witnesses, mileage records, parking receipts, and even photos with date and location that prove this. Who are you anyway? Asked one of the board members, an elderly gentleman with white hair. My name is Lauren Davis. I'm a medical student and... She's Edward's private call girl, interrupted Ryan with disdain. The same one for whom he diverted company funds to pay for her sister's medical treatment. An icy silence took over the room. Edward stepped forward, his expression dangerously contained. Be careful with your next words, Ryan. Lauren swallowed the insult, focusing on what mattered. My sister's treatment was legitimately funded by the Mitchell Foundation, not by MB Tech. I have all the documentation here. She handed another folder to the nearest board member. As for my relationship with Edward, it began as a private arrangement, yes, but it transformed into something neither of us expected. This is touching, mocked Ryan, but it doesn't explain the documented transfers here. Forged transfers, corrected Edward, examining the evidence Lauren had brought, and I believe I know who's behind this. The door to the room opened again, and Victor Barnes entered as if he had been invited. His confident smile faltered slightly upon seeing Lauren, and the documents spread across the table. Victor, Edward greeted coldly. What a coincidence to find you here, just when false accusations against me are being discussed. I came at Ryan's request, replied Victor, regaining his composure, as an external consultant, or as the architect of this farce, countered Edward. Gentlemen of the board, I believe we are facing a deliberate conspiracy to remove me from the presidency of MB Tech, and I have proof of that as well. With a gesture, Edward asked Christine to deliver another set of documents, emails between Ryan and Victor, recorded conversations, bank transfers to offshore accounts. The plan was simple: temporarily remove me, push through the merger with Neotech during my absence, and then reveal that Victor is the true owner of the company. When I returned, if I returned, MB Tech would no longer be mine. The board members examined the documents with expressions ranging from shock to indignation. Ryan visibly paled, while Victor maintained a tense smile. This is absurd, tried Ryan. Edward is desperate, inventing conspiracies to divert attention from his own transgressions. Transgressions? Edward took a step toward his former friend. Like betrayal, disloyalty? You learned well from Victor, didn't you? History repeats itself. The confrontation was interrupted when Brooke Resende burst into the room, her high heels echoing on the marble floor. Victor, what's going on? Why is the girl here? She should be... Brooke stopped abruptly upon realizing all eyes were on her, her face flushed with shame and anger. Should be where, Brooke? Asked Edward calmly. Testifying against me in exchange for your mercy, or perhaps destroying her own reputation to save mine. Edward's ex-fiancée looked at Victor, who maintained a stony expression. The silence that followed was deafening. The consequences of that confrontation in the boardroom were immediate and powerful. Ryan Adams was removed from his position as financial director, and an internal investigation was opened to examine his involvement with Victor Barnes. The merger with Neotech was indefinitely suspended, and Victor's credibility in the market suffered a devastating blow when the specialized press reported the attempted corporate manipulation. Edward emerged stronger from the episode. The board reaffirmed its confidence in his leadership, and MB Tech's shares quickly recovered after the official announcement that the accusations against its founder were unfounded. But the professional victories seemed secondary to what really mattered. The day after the confrontation, Edward found Lauren in the garden of his mansion, contemplating the sunset over New York City. You saved everything, he said, sitting beside her. My company, my reputation, everything. Lauren smiled softly. So you would have done the same for me. Yes, agreed Edward, holding her hand, and that scares me. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have risked anything for anyone. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the distant song of birds and the muffled noise of the city below. "Our contract ends next week," observed Edward. "I know. I think we need to renegotiate the terms." Lauren felt her heart race. "What terms do you suggest?" "Indefinite," he replied simply. "No termination clauses." She turned to face him, seeking in his eyes confirmation of what those words meant. "Edward Mitchell, are you asking me to stay permanently?" "I'm asking for more than that," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "I'm asking to build something together. Something real, Lauren. No contracts, no formal agreements. Just us." The tears Lauren had been holding back finally overflowed. "I was so afraid that when all this was over, you wouldn't want me anymore." "I was afraid of wanting too much," confessed Edward, "of needing you more than you needed me." That night, under the stars of New York City, they sealed a new commitment, not on paper but in the heart. In the following weeks, life assumed a new rhythm. Claire, now in full recovery, was officially introduced to Edward. The teenager, initially cautious with the man who had won her sister's heart, soon became enchanted with his intelligence and the surprisingly gentle manner behind the austere facade. "He's nothing like I imagined," Claire confided to Lauren after Edward took them to an interactive science exhibition at the Natural History Museum. "I thought he would be one of those arrogant billionaires from the movies." "He has layers," smiled Lauren, "many layers." Claire's recovery progressed so well that doctors authorized her return to school. Lauren, with Edward's support, resumed her medical studies full-time, determined to complete her specialization in rare diseases. As for Edward, the episode with Ryan and Victor transformed him profoundly. Although he was still the relentless leader of MB Tech, something in his approach had changed. He initiated an employee wellness program, expanded the company's maternity leave, and significantly increased the Mitchell Foundation's funding for medical research. "I never imagined seeing you championing social causes," commented Lauren after a press conference where Edward announced a partnership with public universities for the development of assistive technologies. "I learned from you," he replied simply, "to see beyond the immediate, the tangible." Their relationship, born of such unusual circumstances, flourished under the watchful eye of New York society. Initially, there were malicious speculations about the student who conquered the billionaire, but the discretion and dignity with which Lauren carried herself silenced even the most fervent critics. On a Sunday morning, while having coffee on the terrace, Edward surprised Lauren with an unexpected invitation. "How about we visit Cape Cod? The historic town? I've always wanted to visit." "I was thinking of more than a visit," explained Edward. "I'm considering buying a property there, a place for us to escape the city when we need to." The idea of a joint refuge, a space that would be theirs, warmed Lauren's heart. 2 weeks later, they flew by helicopter to the charming colonial town on the coast between New York and Boston. The property Edward was considering was a house by the sea with a view of the islands of Cape Cod Bay. Built in colonial style but completely renovated, it combined historic charm with modern comfort. "It's perfect," declared Lauren, enchanted with the golden light that bathed the wooden veranda. "Not yet," replied Edward mysteriously. "Something is missing." That night, after a candlelit dinner at a restaurant in the historic center of Cape Cod, Edward took her for a walk on the cobblestone streets. The town, illuminated by old-fashioned lamps, seemed straight out of a fairy tale. They stopped in front of an old church, its white facade standing out against the starry sky. "Did you know this church is over 300 years old?" commented Edward. "It survived wars, epidemics, changes of government. I've always been fascinated by how some things endure despite everything." "Like true love," replied Lauren, squeezing his hand. "Exactly." To her surprise, Edward knelt on the cobblestone pavement, in his hands a small blue velvet box. "Lauren Davis, you entered my life as a business arrangement, a contract with a fixed term and specific terms, but it transformed into the most precious and indefinable thing I've ever experienced." He opened the box, revealing a sapphire ring surrounded by small diamonds. "Do you accept a new agreement, this time for life?" The tears Lauren had been holding back finally overflowed as she nodded, unable to speak. The words came at last, laden with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring slid perfectly onto her finger, as if it had always belonged there. As they embraced under the starry sky of Cape Cod, Lauren thought about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From the deepest despair to the most complete happiness. The news of the engagement between billionaire Edward Mitchell and medical student Lauren Davis became front-page material in social columns. The wedding date was set for 6 months later, enough time for Claire to be completely recovered and for Lauren to complete her semester at the university. The preparations for the ceremony revealed a side of Edward that few knew, a romantic perfectionist who involved himself in every detail, from selecting the color palette to choosing the musicians. "I never imagined you would be so detailed with a wedding," commented Lauren after a particularly long meeting with the event planner. "It's our day," he replied simply. "I want it to be perfect." Life, however, rarely follows the planned script. 3 months before the wedding, Lauren began to feel strangely unwell. Morning sickness, unusual sensitivity, persistent fatigue. As a medical student, she recognized the signs, but was reluctant to believe it. A discreet test confirmed her suspicions. She was pregnant. The news filled her with indescribable joy, but also anxiety. How would Edward react? They had never discussed children, despite his evident affection for Claire. That night, she prepared a special dinner at the mansion. When Edward arrived, he found the dining room illuminated by candles, with the table set for an intimate celebration. "What are we celebrating?" he asked, kissing her softly. "A surprise," replied Lauren, leading him to the table. Next to his plate was a small box wrapped in blue paper. "For me." "Open it." Inside the box, Edward found a tiny pair of white crocheted booties. He looked at Lauren, understanding slowly taking over his face. "Are you—" She nodded, tears blurring her vision again. "We're expecting a baby." Edward remained silent for a moment that seemed eternal. Then, to Lauren's astonishment, she saw something she never imagined seeing. Tears in the eyes of that always so controlled man. "A child," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "Our child." He stood up and hugged her with an intensity that expressed everything words could not contain: gratitude, love, hope. The man who had once declared that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, now surrendered completely to the uncertain and wonderful future that opened before them. The wedding was moved up, an intimate ceremony held at the Cape Cod house with only close family and friends. Claire, radiant in her bridesmaid dress, led her sister down the path of white petals to the improvised altar on the beach. Lauren's 3-month belly, still discreet under the lace dress, carried the promise of a new life. A life conceived not by contract or calculation, but by the love that had blossomed in the most unlikely circumstances. As they exchanged vows under the golden sunset of Cape Cod, Edward and Lauren sealed more than a marriage. They celebrated the extraordinary journey that had brought them there, from the densest shadows to the brightest light, from isolation to connection, from distrust to absolute faith, from contract to true and unshakable love. 5 years had passed since that beachside wedding in Cape Cod. The house that had been just an occasional refuge had become the center of the Mitchell-Davis family's life. Edward, surprising the market and himself, had decided to gradually step away from the executive presidency of MB Tech, remaining only as chairman of the board. The decision, unthinkable years before, reflected his new priorities. "I never thought I'd see the day when Edward Mitchell would choose family over business," commented an economic columnist in a profile about the businessman. The family he had chosen had grown beyond expectations. What should have been one baby turned out to be 2, identical twins, Peter and Michael, born on a summer night that Edward described as the moment I truly understood the meaning of life. 3 years later, the family was completed with the arrival of Sophia. A girl with intense green eyes like her mother, and the fierce determination of her father. Claire, now a young adult studying biomedicine at the same university where Lauren had graduated, was a constant presence in the lives of her nephews. Completely recovered from the disease that had almost taken her, she dedicated herself to research on innovative therapies for conditions similar to what she had faced. On that sunny Sunday morning, the family was gathered on the spacious veranda of the Cape Cod house. The children played in the garden under Claire's watchful eye, while Edward and Lauren enjoyed a rare moment of tranquility. 5 years, commented Edward, observing the children. Sometimes I still wonder if I deserve all this. Lauren smiled, squeezing his hand. It's not a question of deserving. It's a question of embracing what life offers us. Her wisdom always impressed him. Lauren wasn't just the wife who had brought him back to emotional life, but also a respected professional. After completing her specialization in rare diseases, she had founded a department dedicated to the subject at the Gamma Institute, the same one that had saved Claire years earlier. Her work had already helped dozens of families who, like her in the past, were fighting against time and lack of resources. Speaking of embracing life, said Edward, I received an interesting call yesterday. From whom? Believe it or not, from Victor Barnes. Lauren raised her eyebrows, surprised. After the MB Tech scandal, Victor had disappeared from the radar. Rumors said he had moved to Europe. What did he want? To apologize, apparently. Edward shook his head, still processing the conversation. He said he went through a personal transformation after an event that almost took him. He's back in the States and wants to clear his conscience. Do you believe him? Edward reflected for a moment, watching the children play. I don't know. Maybe. People can change. I changed. You didn't need to change, corrected Lauren softly. You just allowed your true self to emerge. He smiled, recognizing the truth in her words. The cold and calculating Edward from the times before Lauren wasn't his essence, but armor built after deep traumas. Anyway, I agreed to meet him the next time we're in New York. Are you sure about that? Resentment is too heavy a burden to carry for the rest of your life, replied Edward, surprising himself with the conclusion. If he truly seeks redemption, who am I to deny him that chance? The conversation was interrupted when Peter and Michael ran to them, showing a small crab they had found on the beach. The naturalness with which Edward entered into the twins' animated conversation, showing genuine interest in their discovery, was a silent testimony to how much he had grown as a human being. The following week, the family returned to New York for the annual Mitchell Foundation event. What had begun as a modest initiative of Edward's mother had transformed into one of the country's largest philanthropic organizations, dedicated not only to medical research, but also to educational programs for underprivileged communities. The Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was filled with influential personalities, business people, politicians, artists, all gathered in support of the cause. Lauren, elegant in a navy blue dress, circulated among the guests with the ease of someone born into that environment, though she had never lost the authenticity that characterized her. Dr. Mitchell, called a familiar voice, your work at the Gamma Institute is simply revolutionary. Lauren turned and found Brooke Resende. The years had been kind to Edward's ex-fiancée, still beautiful, but with a sobriety she didn't possess before. The initial shock of seeing her there gave way to curiosity. Brooke, I didn't expect to find you here. I imagine not, replied Brooke with a hesitant smile. I'm probably the last person you'd want to see at this event. Actually, I'm just surprised. I thought you were living abroad. I was. Paris for 3 years. I came back a few months ago to take care of my mother. Brooke paused, visibly uncomfortable. Lauren, I know I have no right to ask this, but I'd like to talk in private. Just a few. Some minutes. The unexpected request left Lauren intrigued. After a moment of reflection, she nodded. All right, we can go to the garden. The hotel's suspended garden offered a tranquil refuge from the buzz of the party. The two women, who years earlier had been almost enemies, sat side by side, contemplating the panoramic view of the city. I came to apologize, Brooke began without preamble, for what I did to you, For the threats, the manipulation, everything. Lauren studied the woman's face, looking for signs of falsity, but found only genuine remorse. Why now, after all these years? Brooke sighed deeply. Because I finally understood the harm I caused, not just to you and Edward, but to myself. She paused, gathering courage. I was trapped in a toxic cycle with Victor. He manipulated me, made me believe I was worth nothing. Without him, that I needed revenge against Edward to feel complete. And what changed? Everything. Brooke smiled sadly. Paris was my new beginning. Away from Victor, away from toxic social circles, I found a different purpose. I started working with art therapy for women victims of abusive relationships. I discovered I could use my own experience to help others. Lauren felt an unexpected wave of empathy. That's admirable, Brooke. I'm not seeking admiration, she replied honestly. Just peace. And I can't have peace knowing how much I tried to harm you and your family. She hesitated before continuing. I saw photos of your children in the magazines. They're beautiful. You and Edward have built something precious together. Thank you, replied Lauren, genuinely touched by the sincerity in the other woman's voice. I know it might be asking too much, but do you think you could ever forgive me? The question hung in the night air. Lauren reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her there. From despair to hope, from negotiation to true love. How could she deny another person the chance at redemption that life had granted her? I hold no grudge, Brooke, she finally said. The past is behind us. We all deserve the chance to rebuild our lives. Tears glistened in Brooke's eyes. Thank you. You were always a better person than me. It's not about being better or worse. It's about choosing love instead of hurt. When they returned to the party, Lauren spotted Edward talking with a man she immediately recognized, Victor Barnes. Different from the arrogant Victor she had met years before, this one seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of his actions had compressed him. She approached cautiously, touching Edward's arm. In a gesture of support, he smiled at her, a silent communication that he was fine. Lauren, greeted Victor with evident discomfort. Edward was telling me about the incredible work you've been doing at the Gamma Institute. It's work that I'm passionate about, she replied simply. I was telling Victor that your department is developing a revolutionary protocol for Goldman-Merrick syndrome, explained Edward. The same condition that affected Claire. Victor nodded, visibly moved. It's ironic. My niece was diagnosed with a similar condition 6 months ago. We're desperate for treatment options. The revelation surprised Lauren. The universe had strange ways of connecting destinies. Bring her to the Institute, she said without hesitation. We'll evaluate if the protocol can help her. Victor stared at her with incredulity. After everything I did to you both, you would help my family. I'm not helping you, Victor, replied Lauren firmly. I'm helping a child who needs treatment. That's what I do. That night, after the event, as they were returning to the house where Claire was waiting with the children, Edward remained thoughtful. What are you thinking about? Asked Lauren, observing his profile as the car glided through the illuminated streets of New York. Circles, he replied enigmatically. How life brings us back to the same crossroads, offering new chances to choose different paths. Like today with Victor and Brooke? Exactly. Edward took her hand, intertwining their fingers. You know what impresses me? How you manage to offer compassion without sacrificing your integrity. It's one of the many reasons why I love you more each day. Lauren smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Compassion isn't weakness, it's strength. You taught me that. Me? Asked Edward, surprised. Yes, you. When you agreed to help Claire without knowing me, when you decided to trust me despite everything you had experienced, when you allowed your heart to open again, even knowing you could get hurt. The car parked in front of the Upper East Side mansion, which they maintained as a residence in New York, although they spent most of their time in Cape Cod. Welcoming lights shone through the windows, and small silhouettes could be seen running through the entrance hall, the children probably negotiating with Claire for a few more minutes before bedtime. We're home, said Edward, looking at the scene through the windshield. Yes, agreed Lauren, squeezing his hand. Home. As they walked together to the door, Lauren reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. From a cold and calculated contract was born the deepest and most transformative love. From two wounded and distrustful souls emerged a family united by understanding and mutual respect. Destiny, with its mysterious wisdom, had transformed the most unlikely of negotiations into the most beautiful love story. A love that not only healed old wounds, but created space for new beginnings, new forgiveness, new possibilities. As they embraced their sleepy children and thanked Claire for the evening, Edward and Lauren exchanged a look that said more than words. A look that recognized not only the path traveled, but also the future they would still build together. A future where each day would be a silent reaffirmation of the most important contract they had ever made, the commitment to love, not out of obligation or necessity, but for the simple and extraordinary joy of having found in each other the home they had always sought. Dear listeners, we hope that Edward and Lauren's story has touched your hearts. To continue this journey of emotions, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking the button on the left. If this narrative about redemption, trust, and true love awakens something in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexity of human feelings and the surprises that destiny holds for us. What did you think about the